Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Hey, thanks for checking into the Best Houston Sports Podcast. Sorry if I'm not very excited about this one. It's not what we were expecting. It's not the way we expected the Cougars season to end. Welcome to our live Houston Cougars-Duke Blue Devils Sweet 16 postgame show. Robert with Stephen Kerr, my longtime host. And Stephen, the Cougs have had a bunch of special teams the last few years, but I honestly felt like this one was the most special of them all. What they were able to do in the Big 12, number one seed going into the tournament, the Shead ankle just made you want to cry, though. I mean, just, God.
Yeah, so many injuries to key players. I mean, you think about, I think it started with Terrence Arsenault, and then Ramon Walker was injured for well over a month. And Juwan Roberts has been banged up. I mean, he still played through it, but you've had a couple of injuries that put you out for the year, and then you lose your best player, Jamal Shead, in the first half of this game. And it was interesting, Robert, because right before the second half began, he came out there. It looked like they might put him back in, and you kind of thought, no, I mean, surely not. The way he was walking, he had his shoe on, but he wasn't taking part in layup drills. So, the fact that he didn't start the second half, I think that was pretty much an indication that we weren't going to see Shead again. But you're right about it being a special team, Robert. And the one thing I can say is this Cougar team didn't quit. And no Kelvin Sampson team is going to quit. They still had a chance to win, even at the very end, even though it just didn't seem to me like the Cougars were as close as they actually were in this game. It didn't feel like they were that close, but they hung in there, but they couldn't get the free throws to fall, and they couldn't get the stops when they needed them.
Yeah, I want to get into some big picture stuff as the show rolls on, but, the offense was too much one-on-one, not enough body movement, guys standing still. It was a problem even before Shead got hurt, Stephen, but the fact that Sharp wasn't even involved in the offense, I mean, he barely took any shots after going for 30 against the Aggies. That whole situation was just bizarre. He was the guy that was leading the way just a few days ago.
Well, and he definitely needed to step up, especially when Shead went out. The first thing I thought of was, hey, Emmanuel Sharp's got to get in this game, and LJ Cryer's got to get in this game. Neither one of them produced the shots when you needed them to. What did he have? 4 points, something like that?
Yeah, it just seemed like the whole team was stunned after Shead to the point where the movement wasn't the same offensively. I mean, defensively, they were okay, but they still weren't the defense that we're used to. Now, I know not having Shead plays a factor in that as well, but the defense you expected at least could keep things up. I mean, Shead goes to the bench at times, during the regular season, and it's not a problem. The defense is not a problem typically, but it was like the air got knocked out of them, and rightly so. I mean, geez, I mean, what would you expect there? I mean, I don't know what else to say,
Well, yeah, I mean, at some point, Robert, I mean, we all talk about how you need to, the next man up thing, you need to pull yourself together, but sometimes there's only so much you can do. And so many players have been injured on this team that either weren't in the lineup, or if they were just a banged up team. I mean, honestly, and we talked about this, Duke didn't really have the depth either. They didn't play that many players in their rotation any more than the Cougars did, but the Cougars were just more banged up. And that was the thing that worried me most in this tournament as you go deeper is, how much can these guys stand, with Ramon Walker coming in and, Roberts, it didn't look like he had too many effects of the leg injury he suffered a few weeks ago. But that some of these guys are just so banged up. Yeah, there's just only so much you can do. And yet, like I said, at the very end, they just hung around. They still hung around, but I don't know that the Aggies game necessarily took a lot of their momentum, or not momentum, but adrenaline away. I think it was just a case of you just lost one player too many, and your concentration level goes down because they just missed so many free throws, Robert. It was ridiculous. If they had made 4 more free throws than they did, they might have pulled this game out by 1 point.
9 of 17 from the free throw line. This is like a regular problem with Kelvin Sampson teams. I hate to say it.
It is.
Francis was terrible. I mean, he went to the line 4 times. He's not a good free throw shooter, of course, but Juwan Roberts, 3 of 8. Otherwise, it wasn't terrible, but those guys missed a grand total of 8 free throws. And boy, that's a big one in a game like this. And you mentioned Sharp and how many points he had. He had 7 points, but
7, okay.
I was on 7 shots. It was 2 3-point shots that he took the whole game. 3 for 3 from the free throw line. He made 2 shots the entire game, but he only took 7. That's what I'm talking about. Like, that's the guy I thought they would depend on once, Shead came out of the game. And, I know Shead's got to set him up a little bit, but run some screens, get him coming off action plays. I don't know. It just seems like there are times where Kelvin in these tournaments gets caught with his pants down offensively. I don't like to blame this thing on Kelvin because, you lost Shead and Roberts is banged up, and obviously just all the injuries that they've suffered this year. But still, this is not a one-time problem, Stephen. No. This is something that, there's a reason you win championships, and it's not, you just can't do it on the defensive end. It's not to win 6 games in the tournament against quality teams. You have to be able to run some stuff and do something and come up with some creativity on the offensive end. And it just can't be, wait around and one-on-one stuff and maybe throw it into Juwan Roberts. We don't know how injured Roberts was, but he scored 13. He was 5 of 9, but still, it's a lot to ask for this offense.
Well, and when they started the game, they came out fast. They were hustling on defense. They were making steals. They made a number of steals in this game, even in the second half when, things were looking bleak. But even before Shead went out, Robert, this also happens a little too often. The Cougars hit a wall. They go over 5 minutes without a bucket after they'd gotten, I think it was 10-7 at one point, and then they just hit a wall. And the good news is Duke also had a long scoring drought. Otherwise Duke would have taken over this game even earlier. And this was before Shead went out. And I think the Cougars missed 9 of their last 10 shots until the end of the first half. And then, at the very end of the game, I think Cryer made one to pull them to within 23-22. But they just had too many instances where the shots weren't falling, just a whole bunch of them basically in droves. And, and then when Shead went out, of course, it just made it even worse. And then Duke started to heat up, even though they didn't go on a massive run, but they did what they needed to do. And the Cougars just could not get the stops and catch up.
Give Jeremy Roach a lot of credit for Duke. He hit some big shots. Filipowski, those guys combined for 30 points. And in a game where Duke only scored 54, they were pretty much the offense. Proctor added 9, so he was a little bit involved there, but it was mostly those guys. You got to give them credit. It sucks because not only did you lose, everybody hates losing to Duke. We know that. Stephen, if you look at the last 4 minutes, twice, I want to say it was 2 times in a row, LJ Cryer gets stripped.
Yeah.
Then Francis misses a point-blank layup. Those were some key possessions that they just fell apart when it counted. You knew Jamal Shead would have had the ball in his hands, but still you miss a shot. Francis has got to be expected to make that putback. And, Francis on a big stage, he's a freshman. He just couldn't handle it, I think.
Yeah. And they missed a number of close end shots, Robert. Throughout the whole game, but yeah, especially in the second half, there were several that just did not fall, or a missed dunk here and there. And those shots really hurt when you don't make those shots and you even get second chance points. The Cougars shot quite well in the paint. They had like 26 points in the paint. And I think the first 8, came in the first half, were all in the paint. So, the shots from the paint were not too bad, but the other shooting just wasn't there.
Yeah, well, you couldn't get anybody open. Like I said, they were just standing. You're standing there, and the defense is can as long as they keep them in front of them, that they're fine, because the Cougars just weren't moving. They weren't running actions. They weren't getting guys open. I don't think, yeah, Duke's defense was fine, but I don't think the Duke defense was anything that was spectacular. This was more about the Cougars not doing stuff. But in the end, I mean, let's face it, Jamal Shead and Juwan Roberts, one of them was like probably at 70%. I don't know what Juwan Roberts was, but maybe he was at 70%. And then Jamal Shead's just not on the court. Two of your leaders, they'd been there for years. These were the guys that you expected to take them to the Final Four and maybe win the championship. Although, as banged up as they were, I didn't give them any shot at beating UConn from what I've seen. But it was just so sad, Stephen. At the end of the game, you look at Jamal, he's sitting there and you could just see the devastation in his face. I mean, he was trying to hold back tears from what it looked like almost. And, to go through everything that he had gone through and for his whole career to end like it did in this game tonight, it's just, I just feel so much. That guy put so much into this program. He was such a leader. He was such, a fantastic player to pull this team year after year into the tournament, making runs and doing all the stuff that he did on both ends of the floor, getting Big 12 honors this year and all that. I mean, just it's terrible.
Well, Robert, I personally can feel for Jamal Shead because now this is obviously not on the same level as what Shead is, in college basketball. But when I was a kid, I was playing in a national tournament in baseball, and it was the first game of the tournament. And my third at bat, I hit the base and turned my ankle just like Shead did. And I came out of the game and I ended up playing the next day, but I had to miss that game and the game that evening. And I remember, you're talking about having tears in your eyes, trying to hold them back, especially when they told me that I may not see any action the rest of the tournament. I definitely just about started crying. So, nobody wants to get hurt at any time, but especially in a game of this magnitude, you can certainly understand that. And, unfortunately, once he went out, like you said, it just didn't fall. And I think it was more the Cougars offense just made it easy for the Duke defense as much as anything else.
I don't mean to go after Kelvin Sampson, and Tony's in the comments saying, I guess he wants to get rid of Sampson. He says he wants to hire Greg Marshall, or I don't know, but he said they should target Greg Marshall, the Wichita State coach. Tony, you're going to have to explain. You want Sampson out at this point after, he takes you to the tournament every year, into the Sweet 16, pretty much but it's not, this is with Sampson, he runs these guys hard and so hard. Sometimes you wonder, like, every year there's these injuries that pop up.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. It's funny you mentioned that. And I was also thinking how, the Cougars have been to the Final Four multiple times, the Sweet 16 multiple times. In fact, they and Gonzaga, I think, the only teams that have made it each of the last 5 years, not counting 2020 because they didn't have one then. And they've even been to the national championship multiple times. But every year it's something. It's always something. And the last few years, Robert, the injury bug has really bitten this team. And yeah, you may have something there. But listen, Kelvin Sampson's not going anywhere, Tony. And let's think about this for a minute. Would you like to go back to where the Cougars were before Kelvin Sampson came? And I'm talking right before, because then you wouldn't be getting in. If you got in the tournament at all, you'd be going home in the first round, or you'd be lucky to get there at all. I don't think, there's no way that Kelvin Sampson is totally to blame for this team. But yeah, you may have something there, Robert. And I thought the very same thing. Sometimes you can go too hard from the beginning of the season to the end. When you play as many games, when you get into the NCAA tournament and you get deep into the tournament, you play a conference tournament, that's a lot of games. That's a lot of wear and tear on your body just in game action. But then you talk about how hard his practices are, that adds another element to it. And I doubt that Kelvin's going to change his philosophy after all these years, but it does bear mentioning.
Yeah, if you're going to run him that hard, you better be a lot deeper than I guess they were this year. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
thing.
certainly. And with the injuries, it just made it even more, you didn't have hardly any depth at all. So yeah, it is troubling to think that, but no, I mean, look, you get to the Sweet 16 5 years in a row, you're not going to fire the coach. I mean, unless you're Duke or North Carolina, or somebody like that, maybe, or Kentucky, but not Houston.
One of the things Tony does say that is worth mentioning, and I was going to mention, and it is frustrating about this, is it looked like the Cougars were going to get a chance to get some NC State revenge, a rematch in the next round. And boy, any of you that are old enough, and I mean, we are 9 million years old, so we remember that. But I know a lot of you don't remember it, but I'm sure you've seen the play about 4,000 times. And if you're a Cougar fan, obviously, and you're listening to us, if you're a Cougar fan, then you remember that, you've seen that play a million times during the tournament and all that sort of stuff, Stephen. And, that's also frustrating that they didn't get that chance to, kind of try to exact a little bit of that revenge. And, one of the things I was going to play here for you, Stephen, is, I talked to Reed Geddes about that, and I was hoping I was going to be able to play this little clip after the Cougars had won the game and we're going to play NC State, because it's kind of a fun story that you're about to hear. This is it would have been 41 years and 4 days.
Yep.
Since
that's right.
They played in the finals back in 1983. And, if you haven't listened to the show for years and years, you might not know I interviewed Reed Geddes, Phi Slamma Jamma alum. It's a great interview. I want everybody, if you haven't heard it, you're a Cougs fan, you definitely got to go back in the archives and check it out. But I'm going to play you this clip. And Stephen, he told me this great story.
Forever and ever, we'd see the end of that game during the NCAA tournament. And most of the time, when you lose a game as a player, you don't have to relive it over and over again nationally. Did it make it hard for you to watch the tournament at times when you never know when they're going to show that ending one more time?
No. Let me tell you the funniest time that I saw that ending. So I played 1 year in the CBA with the Albany Patroons. Our point guard for the Albany Patroons was Sidney Lowe.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody credits, of course, Lorenzo Charles for catching the air ball and dunking it. And everyone talks about Derek Wittenberg, who was their best player, and Cozell McQueen. The guy that won the national championship for him was Sidney Lowe. Sidney Lowe was spectacular in that championship game. I spent a lot of the game gardening, and the scouting report was I was kind of left as a rover. I could roam and double down and dig down on the bigs and shade over towards Wittenberg, because the scouting report was that Sidney Lowe can't beat you. Well, after he hit about his fifth or sixth jump shot, that scouting report went out the window, and Sidney Lowe was the difference in that game. So Sid and I, we're in the CBA playoffs, and we are in, I want to say Casper, Wyoming, some godforsaken place. And we're sitting in the airport, and we're sitting there in the bar waiting for the plane, having a burger. He and I have never talked about the game. Not one time did we talk about the game. And so it's just the two of us sitting there, and we're watching the TV, and it's NCAA tournament time, and up pops the replay. And we're sitting there, it's dead quiet. It's probably 1 a.m. We're waiting for a red eye. Nobody else in the entire restaurant. And I had the same thought, just kept going through my mind. Don't look at him. Don't look at him. Don't look at him. And sure enough, I look over at him, and he's got this little smart-ass grin on his face, and he's holding his left hand up, and he's twisting his national championship ring.
Oh, no.
I was like, you dog. I mean, what are the chances of that playing out where I'm sitting in a restaurant with Sidney Lowe having dinner and watching that replay? That was miserable.
You couldn't have scripted that, Stephen.
Oh, and I remember that interview, Robert, that you did, and I remember that story now that he told it. And yeah, I was in college 41 years and 4 days later, so I certainly remember that game. And he's right. Sidney Lowe was the guy. Of course, they talk about the play at the end, but you also have to remember that this was a game where they had no shot clock, and it was that game. And then 2 years later in the national championship, you have a Villanova team coached by Raleigh Massimino that comes out of nowhere and beats a powerhouse Georgetown team. So 2 out of 3 years, you've got a Cinderella beating a team that with overwhelming odds should have won the game. That is one of the biggest reasons that they finally got a shot clock a few years later. because you could just stand there. You know, you talk about standing around and doing the four corners offense like North Carolina used to do, and just holding the ball before you finally take a shot. You know, that wasn't the Cougars game. And that's what made me so angry, I think, about that more than anything else, is it really wasn't a game to me. It was just, how long could you hold the ball before you took a shot? And especially when you got the lead, you didn't give it up. But it was just, you know, you had to get NC State credit. They won the game. And yeah, the Cougars could have gotten their revenge, but I think it's mostly Cougar fans like you and me, Robert, that it would probably mean much to, because none of these kids were certainly born during that time. So probably didn't have the same meaning for them. But anyway.
Oh, of course not. But still, it's
for us,
you know,
it would have been nice.
They still know the history, I'm sure.
Well, sure
I'm
they
sure
do.
they know
Sure
the
they do.
history.
But
I'm
it's
sure
not the
they've
same
seen.
thing.
I'm sure they've seen the shot. I'm sure they probably have talked to maybe Clyde or Akeem or some of the guys that were around at that time. And by the way, if Reed Geddes is out there, I'm sure, you know, he's as frustrated as anybody was tonight about this game. But you can just connect what you just said to that NC State game tonight, because what I wanted the Cougars to do was to speed things up, but they were taking so long to get in anything. I figured the best way to beat Duke without Jamal Shead, and of course Shead helps you with your pace, of course, because of how fast he is and how quickly he can move the ball up the court. But if they could have, you know, gotten more shots up and done that, I really felt like that would have benefited and just made it sort of a helter-skelter pace. You know, that's what they should have done.
Yeah, because that's not Duke's game at all. And, you know, there were a couple of times where I thought the Cougars were going to be called for a shot clock violation because they took so long to get a shot up. You know, that clock was ticking down and ticking down. I'm like, come on, guys, put the shot up. And that is more to their style. And, you know, they started out the game, as I said, they started out fast and loose. And, you know, but you almost, I think I remember even thinking when they got that 8-0 lead, I even wrote in my notes, like, you know, save some of that for, you know, the end of the game. You still want some of that left in. And then it slowed down almost as quickly as it started. So, yeah, that the pace of the game definitely was not to my liking or to yours, Robert. And I think it certainly came back to bite the Cougars.
Yeah. And the thing is, you look like, if I'm looking big picture at all this, at some point, Kelvin has got to change something up. You know, bring somebody. You know, one of the things is he's been there for a few years. It's the same people, and I get it, but he needs to bring in somebody to mix things up. I mean, the great franchises do change things up. You know, the Astros have had to change things up over the years. They've had to do things differently, and you know, even the Patriots. It was a defensive team before Tom Brady really got it going in the late aughts. But early on, those championships, they were winning mostly on defense. It wasn't Tom Brady, right. But they started to realize, okay, we've got to change things up, and we got Brady, and we're going to have to start winning in more offensive games and stuff like that. And you know, Kelvin, it seems like we have the same complaint once we get to the tournament every year. The offense, you know, there are long stretches of just they can't put the ball in the basket, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, I've said that so many times. I mean, that to me is the biggest thing, is these long stretches of, I mean, they went 5 minutes in the first half. And as I said, Duke did the same thing. They had a long scoring drought. But, you know, you get in a tournament game like this, you get up against a team like UConn or Purdue, that's not going to work. I mean, you've got to have more consistency. And you certainly have to make more shots close in, you know, the layups, the dunks, things like that. Those shots have got to go in. And you mentioned the free throws, you know, being such a problem over the years with Kelvin Sampson teams. I don't know what you have to do, but you definitely got to get better at the free throw line, especially in a close tournament game like this.
How much of that do you think is just the energy they exert and the force that they play with, that maybe the legs get tired at the free throw line? Or, you know, what do you think that is?
Well, in this case, maybe, but I mean, this is a problem even during the regular season, Robert. We saw stretches where they just missed critical free throws that they should have made. So yeah, as you get later on, I'd say maybe that's a possibility. But listen, as many times as you go to the free throw line, you know, they certainly didn't have that problem last week because the Aggies were the ones that were going to the free throw line. The Cougars weren't. But in this case, you had a good number of free throws. What'd you say? 9 of 17. They had 17 free throws, and you only make 9 of them. That's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, and again, I just want this wasn't everybody. It's basically 2 guys, and it's your 2 big guys,
Right.
and everybody else made all their free throws. So I don't know what to say. And usually, big guys, they're not good free throw shooters. And Duke,
I just asked Shaquille O'Neal and players
yeah,
like that. He was,
yeah. I mean,
but still,
guys like Jokic and Embiid, they're the newer players, and they're more. It seems like they're getting better at that sort of thing. But yeah, that's typically a big issue. And just looking forward for like 2 seconds, Stephen. The other thing about this run is, I just don't know where the Cougars are going forward, because he's been able to reload time and time again, and I get that. I get it. And I love Sharp, and Francis is going to be a good rotation player for a long time. But this team leans so heavily on Jamal Shead and Juwan Roberts, and those guys were such veterans and leaders and all of that sort of thing, Stephen. I don't know if they're going to be able to be the same type of team that, gets to the tournament, gets to the Sweet 16 like they haven't. At some point, you wonder if he can continue to reload, especially losing 2 guys that are this big.
Well, we've said that, of course, about Marcus Sasser and guys, even before him, Quentin Grimes and, many of these other players. I mean, it always feels that way because these guys are going to come and go. And I think it's easier now to reload because of the transfer portal than it ever was. But of course, all the other teams get the same advantage. So it's not like an advantage necessarily. But I think it is easier, especially for a team like the Cougars, to reload. But yeah, you wonder, though, how many years can they keep going back to the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8, Final 4, changing in and changing out? I mean, that's the challenge I guess every coach faces. But with Kelvin Sampson, I mean, it's certainly something to think about. But I guess I trust the process in that respect, that he's going to reload and they're at least going to have a chance to get back. And, the one thing I will say, Robert, is the Cougars did prove one thing this year, and that is they could win in the Big 12. They definitely could do that. They just need to take the next step and go much further.
Well, the Big 12 couldn't win in the tournament, though. I mean,
well, that does, yeah. But I mean, in the regular season, that's all you know. And of course, they couldn't. They did lose twice to Iowa State, so it's not like they rolled through. But they at least proved that they could play in a conference like the Big 12. That the AAC, it was no fluke. These were the big boys, and but you just have to know that each year you're going to have to look for certain players that can come in and take the place of a Jamal Shead. And it might not happen right away. But, remember Jamal Shead, he didn't start out to be this kind of a player. He had to develop year after year. He got better and better and better. And this year, now he's an All-American. So that is the thing that you worry about, is you can't just expect a guy to come in next year, even if he's a transfer portal person, and take up where Jamal Shead and players like that left off.
Yeah. Also, just going back to NC State, I felt like if the Cougs could get by Duke, and of course, with a healthy Jamal, we didn't know Jamal Shead was going to get hurt, but if they could get by Duke with a healthy Jamal Shead, watching NC State tonight, I thought, the Cougars have got that game.
Oh, absolutely. I would have definitely given a favor to win that game, and you get in the Final Four, that's when it gets a little dicey. But I think
NC State just doesn't have the athletes, and there's a lot of teams in this tournament that I felt like the Cougs faced 2 of the more athletic teams in Duke and Texas A&M in the tournament. Actually, I mean, their draw was pretty tough. It looks like
it was. And, with the Aggies, even as tough a game as the Aggies gave them, I mean, the Cougars, they went step for step with them and they just didn't quit. And against Duke, I mean, I still felt they had a chance to beat Duke. Duke's defense is actually, I think, in defensive efficiency, they were the top 20 in the nation. So they were no slouch. But again, I just think it was the offense that made it easy for them to play that kind of defense. And listen, this Filipowski guy, the dude can shoot from 3. And I worried about that even before the game started when I looked at his 3-point shooting and just overall Duke, shooting, I think 38% from 3-point range coming into this game. So that was something you definitely had to worry about.
Yeah, they were 35.3 from three for the game. Filipowski had 3 of them. He was the leader. I mean, they had a few guys that just got one, like 3 of their other guys got one, Roach and McCain and Proctor, but that was it from 3. It was mostly Filipowski from 3, and they weren't great at the free throw line, but they only had 12 free throws. The other thing is, I thought it was early on, I was excited because it looked like the refs were going to let them play exactly the opposite of the Aggies game.
Well, it did, but now did you notice in the first half that Kelvin Sampson was getting pretty hot at some of the calls that were going against the Cougars, and at one point,
he was. That's always Kelvin Sampson.
I know he is, but at one point he went after one of the officials, and I guess got really upset about the way the official talked to him. And then a few minutes later, the official calls a foul. The same official who Kelvin Sampson gets into it calls a foul. It was an offensive foul on Cryer a few minutes later. So you kind of thought, I wonder what that's going on. But no, it wasn't anything like the officiating the week before. You certainly can't. You can't fault the officials for the fact that the Cougars lost this game today.
Yeah, maybe I jinxed them a little bit because I put out a tweet a couple of days ago, and I think it was yesterday, actually. Yesterday morning, I put out a tweet, which has kind of gone, it's gone viral. It's got 219 retweets and 1,100 likes. But basically, I said, this was after the Rockets win on Wednesday night. I said, after 4 long years, the Houston Rockets matter again. Soak it in, Houston. It's a golden era in Houston sports. The Astros are Major League Baseball's gold standard. 7 straight LCS appearances, 4 World Series appearances, and 2 championships. The Cougs are in the Sweet 16 for the 5th straight year as a 1 seed. And this doesn't change that, obviously, for the Cougars. I mean, they're still rolling. I mean, they're still doing this every year. The Texans finished 2 games from the Super Bowl with the NFL's best rookie quarterback season ever, a star head coach, and several Pro Bowl caliber young players. The Rockets, of course, they're the hottest team in the NBA, 2 budding 22 and under stars and 3 or 4 more right on their heels. So it is a golden era. We have to appreciate this. And it doesn't mean you're winning the championship in every sport, but Stephen, it means all 4 teams are exciting. And I can't think of another time in Houston history where we had 4 teams that were this exciting. And I don't want to discount the Dynamo and the Dash that have had, pretty good recent success as well.
Yeah, you're right. It's been a while. And, the fact is they're getting there. They're at least getting in a position to win championships. And I mean, hey, the Astros did win 2 World Series. They could have won more, but they won 2. So there are some things now, since this, I know this is getting off track a little, but since we're in confession time, I might as well just go ahead and tell you that I'm not sure I can watch Rockets games anymore. That I hadn't watched much of their winning streak, but the other night against, it was the game before this one,
the Oklahoma City.
Yeah, Oklahoma City. I decided to tune in, and first half. I mean, they started out pretty good, and then
they won the game, Stephen. You didn't do anything.
They did, but guess what? I turned it off early in the second half once they got behind, and so they came back and won the game. So yeah, maybe I may not be able to watch Rockets games anymore. Robert.
It's the NBA. You get behind some, it's no big deal. I don't think it's.
I know it's great what the Rockets are doing, and it's certainly it beats what's been going on the last few years, because other than the Astros and the Cougars, you didn't have much else to cheer about. Certainly not with the Texans, not with the Rockets, and even with the U of H football team. It's been struggling. They need to get it back together, but. Yeah, at least things are coming up now, and you got to put yourself in a position to win a championship before you can win one.
Yeah, and we can circle it back to the Cougars because, we're talking about them tonight, and this comes down to, how you're building things. And the really impressive thing with all 4 teams is the way they've built things, and that starts with the head coach on all the teams. And, Udoka has been incredible. D'Amico has been incredible, whether it's Dusty or AJ Hinch, hopefully Espada will be incredible. But Kelvin Sampson, the other sports, there's stars. The reason why we're excited are stars. Jalen Green, Şengün, CJ Stroud, the litany of stars, the Altuves and Jordans and all that with the Astros, but the star for the Cougars, and it's why it's so important, and the infrastructure is one guy, and it's Kelvin Sampson.
Yeah.
And you again, I don't think I have to tell anybody that's listening to this, but what Kelvin has done is just I just can't believe it, because I remember going there when this show started 11 years ago, when Houston Sports Talk started. That place was a dingy dump, Hopines, and it was like, it was not a place that you wanted. I remember going out there. I remember interviewing. You can go listen to a clip from the interview when I talked to Kelvin Sampson after he took the job, and he, sort of predicts what's going to happen in a way a few years ago. And you just thought, well, we've heard this before, James Dickey, Tom Penders, whatever.
Yeah.
But, Kelvin Sampson, it's really remarkable, and they're so much fun, and you're disappointed, but at the same point, that the Fertitta Center and Kelvin Sampson and what they're going to bring year in and year out is one of the real special things going on in Houston sports. I mean, it's just, and it's, I love watching their games because of the effort, because of the heart, because of the toughness and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And, it's hard to get too disappointed when you look at just what this team has been through the last few weeks with all the injuries and just the lack of depth and things. It's hard to get, of course, it's disappointing, certainly, but it's hard to get too down on it. And the fact that you've got a guy like Kelvin Sampson who does seem to reload every year. And listen, even the best coaches are going to get criticized. I mean, your assessment of his practices maybe being too hard, or, maybe not getting the offense in focus the way it should sometimes. Yeah, it's probably valid. But overall, I'd rather have Kelvin Sampson than just about any other coach in college basketball right now, especially with the way the sport itself is changing, and not so much for the better. I think we talked about that last week with the officiating and, just all the one and done players and the transfer portal. It's not easy to be a college. It's not easy to be a coach at all, but especially in college basketball right now, it's a big challenge with some of these new things going on.
Yeah. And if you're 22 or 25 or 30, you got to really appreciate this, because not just because it's Kelvin Sampson, and not just because of what he's doing, but because he is 68 years old now, I believe. So he can't do this forever. I mean, most of these guys eventually slow down, and, he might decide to retire too, because he's got his son that's, in waiting.
Yeah. And I was going to say, you go from Kelvin Sampson to Kellen Sampson once Kelvin steps down. And then don't forget, you've got his daughter Laura running the basketball operations of the program. So the Sampson family pretty much runs the Cougar program, Robert, literally right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And, just, it's sad. The season I was just hoping we could get through the weekend, maybe I was going to drag you back into this on Easter Sunday, Stephen.
Yeah, well, I would have done it for sure, with meaning that means we would be able to face NC State, like you said, and doing it, each show that we do, Robert, it means to keep winning. It's like when we do our Astros postgame shows, and the same with the Rockets when they make the playoffs. The Texans, we do one after every game, but the more shows we do, that means the more the team's winning. So yeah, it would have been nice to celebrate going to Easter Sunday with a chance to knock off NC State and then get to the Final Four and see what happens from there.
Yeah. If anybody likes what we're doing, please let us know and get in the comments and go tell your friends. And, this is a labor of love. I mean, if you don't get it, like, this is a labor of love.
Yeah. We're not making six figures a year. Maybe you are, Robert, but I'm not.
Yeah, no, we're surviving on other means, but we do want everybody to join. And I love doing this. I've been doing this for 10 years weekly, and, over 1,500 episodes, I think now. And, go into the archive, do me a favor, look into the archive to our history section, because you're going to listen to some great if you're a Cougar fan, old time Cougar fan, we've got some really good stuff with, there's a clip where a piece of a Don Chaney conversation and Cadillac Anderson, and And of course, I mentioned earlier Reed Geddes.
Yeah, that whole Reed Geddes interview is awesome. I mean, not just that clip that we heard, Robert, but I mean, from start to finish. You definitely go back and listen to that one along with the other ones.
Yeah, there's a tribute to Bill Yeoman when Yeoman passed away, with some really good guests there. You know, it's not me rattling on, but I got people that knew Bill and worked with Bill and stuff like that. So if you're a longtime Cougar fan, or if you're not a longtime Cougar fan, but you just, you know, you enjoy finding out about the history and you enjoy hearing those stories, it's definitely worth a listen. Dale Robertson was there, or talks about. No, it wasn't Dale. I'm sorry. There was a whole special that I did on the 1968, game of the century.
Was it Mickey Herskowitz?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it might have been him that covered that.
It was Mickey, and we had Robert Jacobus, who was a Cougar author, talking about it, and some other people. But there's a special. So there's a lot of good stuff if you kind of click around and check that stuff out, and I hope you do.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say too, we're talking about supporting the show. One thing that most people may not know is the more subscribers we have and the more views we have, the more view hours we have, the more it supports the show. YouTube recognizes that kind of thing. So yeah, get on board. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. It's a free subscription, doesn't cost you anything. But view the clips, view the playlists, view the shows that we do, because that also helps the show grow, exponentially and otherwise.
Another great season for the Cougars, though. Just a devastating ending, of course, with the Jamal Shead injury and what happened tonight. But I mean, number one again this year for a few weeks. They were number one in net ranking, the power ranking going into the tournament. Just to win the Big 12 right off the bat, and a conference that's deep and talented as the Big 12 was a hell of an accomplishment. Thanks for Tony for the comments. A lot of that stuff. I couldn't get into all your comments, Tony, because you were getting way off the track. What I was.
Well, we
doing.
Appreciate you doing. We appreciate you participating, Tony.
Yeah,
we do
for sure. So thanks a bunch, everybody. And I've got a Rocket show coming up this weekend. So I have a Rockets guest, and me and Steven will be back talking Astros for sure, and perhaps some Texans news if there is any between now and midweek. So look for that as well. But again, Cougars season ends. Tough one to the Duke Blue Devils. Thank you, Jamal Shead and Juwan Roberts, for all the great memories. Go Cougs.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.